Wireless mic test 1 2, checking wireless mic. Check check 1 2. We're testing the wireless mic for the cameras and live stream. Check check. Good for the camera. Good for the goose. Good for the gander. What?
I mean, I heard it coming through. It was loud enough, but that's with the volume totally cranked on my laptop. I look in the input audio readout on the Ncast, and I didn't really see it even registering. It's in HDMI 2, which it needs to be.
Well, you should see signals on the, look on the monitor.
On the Ncast, on the input there.
No, look, you'll get a better reading on that monitor, yeah.
Up there?
Yep, so watch, I'm going to talk right now. You should see, they should go almost to the top. Check 1 2, microphone test for the Ncast. Check 1 2. Audio levels should be bouncing up and down if it's getting audio.
It does, but it's not, it hasn't, it's more like a quarter of the way up.
Yep, so go on the input gain there for the Ncast.
But if I want to stay on the HDMI 2, it's all ghosted. Like if I wanted to switch to another input.
No, under audio, there should be like the
Audio sources.
there should be the input volume slider.
Yeah, but it's all ghosted. Unless I got to go to that. No, that one doesn't. It's going from here to the HDMI 2. It's all ghosted. So it's just what it basically takes what send it.
Check, check, 1 2. Hey, 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 hey.
I mean, that's cranked all the way, you know.
So that distorted like it should. Check 1 2, test 1 2. Audio test for the stream, check. Check, check 1 2, testing audio for the live stream, check 1 2, test 1 2, check.
Put it up a tiny bit here, maybe,
Yeah, what are your levels here? Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Good afternoon, welcome. Yeah, those are pretty good levels. Check, check, test 1 2, live stream test.
maybe like in the settings of the channel where you could kind of preset things before this, you know?
Do it there, but it's, I mean, you see that when you connect computers with HDMI, like it only gives you a set volume. You don't have volume control.
I just don't remember this, like, because I know we've hooked it up, like, or have the last bunches of times we've been bagging that and doing it with the other one.
Check 1 2. Good afternoon, welcome. Test 1 2. Thanks for coming. Check 1 2. dedicated showing the live stream. Check, check, 1, 2. A little more for the camera and the stream.
Hey, where's the podium?
Still up in the back.
Need a podium?
Yeah, I asked him to set it up. I tell you, nothing's going right anymore, David.
Check, 1, 2. Blame it on workforce planning.
Hey, so, live streaming, we don't have to use the presentation, right? Yep, we're sending. Because I didn't send it.
Yeah, no, we have it set up so picture, figure out main focus on the presentation. The backup screen is a wide shot of the screen and the. So you want the podium on the front?
Right here on the floor.
Okay.
Yep, thank you, David. I can help you.
No, I just.
And you brought a, did you bring a laptop?
Yeah, it's already
Okay,
up.
okay.
I just have it out of sight, so all he'll need to do is click through. I'm just gonna set up the presentation and then I'll get the podium. Joe, can you mute the mics on the board?
Oh, he turned it on? Wait a minute. Yeah, it's on. Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon. We are going to get started. Good afternoon. I'm David Provo, the EVP for Finance and Administration. As been our practice the last few years, we've been getting together with staff, faculty, and the board formally to present the budget as well as present actuals in the fall after the fall board meeting. And at the end, I'll touch base about expectations of the October meeting and around enhancements we're going to be making to the budget process. But today is really two themes. One, I'm going to share with you what was presented to the Board of Trustees a week ago this past Saturday, as well as presented to the full-time faculty last Tuesday around Budget 2020, how it compares to FY19 and how we are progressing on the road to financial sustainability. Then Karen Miller is going to share the efforts around workforce planning, give some concluding comments about where we landed. You will see the impact on the FY20 budget, which I will speak to, and then Karen will go into more detail. We'll then leave plenty of time for questions, and we will be live streaming to our colleagues in Monterey. And to those folks, if you have questions, there is a link that you were sent that you can send questions in, and Leroy is closely monitoring those questions. Okay, so where I would like to start is this roadmap was developed and presented to the Board of Trustees in the fall of 2016. Mike Thomas and his team worked with a number of areas of the college to create a path to financial sustainability. And what it said is the college could return to operating surpluses by FY21. And you can't read it easily, but I will tell you what was in there were some assumptions that were made around the increase in tuition, increase in enrollments, cutting of cost around non-compensation costs. It made a number of assumptions, and it said by FY21 we could produce a budget that was at an operating surplus. This has been modified after 2 years into it. When I arrived, it was clear that the process of the road to financial sustainability was taking a toll on the organization. People were always felt like they were being asked to cut, and it was having an impact on morale and attitude. So it was last year we brought forward to the board a way to accelerate that path, which many of you have worked on this past year. So I want to quantify what we have accomplished. So you are about ready to see a budget that does have and achieve an operating surplus of $279,000. That is compared to FY16 when the deficit was $16.7 million, $16,692,000. We were taking an additional almost $11 million out of the endowment to cover interest payments. So that was above the 5% standard withdrawal from the endowment. And we took out nearly $6 million for strategic initiatives. That total was $33.5 million of us living beyond our means. And that was fall 2016 when this plan was put in place. 2017, we saw the operating deficit decrease. We did not take out strategic reserves, and that $33.5 million problem was now down to 26.5. In 2018, this past year, we achieved a $10.5 million operating deficit and $11.3 million covering interest, zero of strategic, and the problem now down to 21.9. And in FY19, right now, we're projecting the deficit to be $7.4 million. Only $5 million coming out for interest expense, and the total problem now down to $12.4 million. And in 2020, the budget that was approved by the board last week shows a $279,000 operating surplus, $3 million coming out of the endowment to cover interest, which will go to zero in '21, and thus improving the operating results of the college by $31 million over this period of time. Would not have gotten here without the help of everyone in this room. And President Patton, the Board of Trustees, senior leadership team is well aware of the effort made by the staff of this institution to help us achieve that. And I want to recognize that and thank you all personally. So what is in the budget? This chart here, this is Big M. This is the consolidated high-level operating budget for Big M, which includes schools, Monterey, and the college, and what we call central admin. You can see on the top line, comp and other student net fees. The 2020 column is the first column. So $245 million in gross fees, $78 million in financial aid, a net of $166. Here is the 18 actual numbers, and here is what we're projecting for 19. So you can see we're expecting, because we only increased tuition 2% in Monterey for next year and 3.25% for the college, we will see a slowdown of the top line revenue. In the last couple of years on the road to financial sustainability, we were raising tuition at a greater rate. So you see we have a almost $3 million improvement to the net comp fee revenue. Then on other revenue, you can actually see it's not going up that much, and it 19 projection, it's actually going down, but that's going down because we're not taking as much out of the endowment. So in addition to an operating surplus of positive $279,000, it will be the first time we're truly at a 5% withdrawal from the endowment in more than 20 years. So if you take the cumulative amounts that we've taken out of the endowment to cover interest for strategic initiatives over the last decade or two, it totals somewhere around $150 to $200 million. If we had $150 to $200 million in the endowment and we released that 5%, it would be more than the operating deficit last year. So we wouldn't have had a deficit. So this is what we've been working with the board and strategically saying, how do we stabilize the institution so that it's here for the next 100 years? And that was why we had to do everything that has been done the last 3 years. And FY20 budget recognizes and celebrates that accomplishment. On the expense side, you can see the total expenses of $272.5 million in 2020. That is actually down from $276 million. So expenses are actually going down. Interestingly enough, the $272 million is roughly the same number expenses were in 2016. So all your hard work has paid off in keeping expenses flat as we've been able to grow revenue. As we look to the breakdown by area, we are seeing improvements. The first one is college and central admin. And you can see the operating deficit is FY20 of $5.34 million. That's down from 11.4 and down from 13 in 2018. That is a significant improvement. You can see the top line revenue is going up by 3.2%. That really reflects the pricing increase. We're seeing an increase in financial aid of 6.9%. Given where we're trending right now for the incoming class for the fall, I don't expect it to be that much. We'll be favorable in that budget line. Being need blind, we only know the answer to that number once we hit the May 1st deadline. On the expense side, you can see expenses 217 are coming down. That is primarily driven by the workforce planning efforts. that Karen will talk about. If we go to the Institute, you can see the Institute is budgeting a deficit of $1 million. That is before allocation. We will now allocate all the central admin, which will improve this slide, that bottom line. The 5.3 will come down to about $2 million. The deficit in Monterey will go up to about $2.5 to $3 million as we allocate the costs, and we show that in actual dollars after we get the audit in the fall. But Monterey is showing a significant improvement. That is through expense management, and Monterey has stabilized their enrollments, and we're starting to see trends of enrollments increasing. We are making some investments in Monterey to grow the programs that are strong, and those investments will begin over the course of this summer. With regards to schools, schools remains a strong financial part of the organization. They're generating 6.637 of positive margin. That is seeing a steady increase of 3.8% in the revenue number, total revenue going up 4.5%, and expenses being managed at a level of only 2.2%, resulting in continued improvement in the school's bottom line. So this slide just simply summarizes everything I just said. Net comp fees projected to grow to $169 million. That's up 1.6% from $164. Expenses, 1.4% decrease from FY19. Total expenses since 2016 have been flat, 272.8 to 272.5. And as I mentioned, the loss of roughly $300,000 surplus is a $7.7 million improvement from FY19, and the first operating surplus since 2012. And finally, the other key metrics in that is the endowment draw. We'll only have the additional amount, and the endowment withdrawal, because we do it on a rolling 12 quarters, actually works out, is estimated to be 4.8% of the ending projected balance. And when you add the $3 million for the interest, we'll be at 5.1. You should know the board's already asking us, is 5% the right standard to use, and should we be thinking it's 4%? I have kindly said to them, hey, we just got it to 5, first time in 20 years, can you give us a break? So the next couple slides I want to share are just simply this is a slide I started showing about 2 years ago, and it was really tried to answer the question, how did we get here? How did it get to a point where we had operating surpluses and all of a sudden we started creating deficits? And it was really a combination of the college's decision to control the increase in tuition by implementing CPI plus 1%. And we did that on the revenue side, but we didn't do it on the expense side. So the blue line is total operating expenses. So in 2011, you can see total operating expenses were actually down 2% from the previous year. And they were roughly flat in 2011. But in 2012, expenses went up 6%, but at the same time, our increase in net fees was on a decline. And during these years, that is when the deficit grew from a couple $100,000 to a couple $1 million to maxing out in 2016 of $16.7 million. Since then, we've been able to grow fees at a greater rate of expenses being roughly flat from 16 to 2020, and it is how we have corrected that. We expect going forward those lines to get much closer now that we've achieved financial sustainability. So this slide is something that was in the Road to Financial Sustainability. This showed the performance. So in 2010, you can see a surplus of 5.6 million. 2011, 6.2, 358,000, 2012, and then you can see the deficits growing 13, 14, 15, 16. When you add in the strategic reserves that were also taken down, the 5.9 million in 2016 and the 3.2 million in 2015, you can see the actual losses were even greater, and you can see the steady improvement. Budget this year was 9.7 million. We believe will come in at 7.4, and then we expect to produce operating surpluses in the out years. Right now, we're conservatively projecting those surpluses because we assume we'll need to reinvest because we've been in a 4-year cost-cutting procedure. So that's it on budget. We're going to shift to the impact of workforce planning. Karen's going to share the actual impact in numbers. We're then going to, she's going to share sort of her view of going forward and after workforce planning and how we expect to operate and think and culturally what we will do to make Middlebury strong.
That's for David. I haven't even done anything yet. So thank you for attending this and giving us an opportunity to give you an update on workforce planning. As we've said from the beginning, workforce planning was more than just about reduction. I know that that part of the conversation consumed a lot of our attention. But what I hope to do today is to answer both parts of the equation, what workforce planning effort taught us or told us about what we need to do to position ourselves to thrive in terms of our workforce moving forward, and then how much of that can we afford, given the need to reduce the compensation budget. That going fast. So I said this was more than about the numbers, but we're going to start with the numbers. And these are the numbers for the staff under the Incentive Separation Program and the faculty under the Faculty Retirement Incentive Program. As you might recall, the MIS faculty were also under the ISP. Their numbers are not included in here, nor are their numbers included in David's budget projections. They are on a different time frame, and so they're slightly delayed behind the staff, and so we have not yet completely rolled out that program. But what you can see here from the staff side is that we were able to have reductions in our staff of about 147 positions, which had a cumulative comp and benefit savings of about 9.4 million. We did make some decisions to reinvest some of that in some new positions that we needed, new competencies and skill sets, about 43 new positions at about a 2.9. And as well as making some adjustments to about 100 individuals whose jobs have changed such that they are entitled to a promotion or increase in their pay. On the faculty side, we had 27 faculty retirements. 24 of them were under the Retirement Incentive Program. 3 were just in the normal course for about a $4.6 million total comp and benefit savings. We are not putting any replacements in for faculty for the budget year FY20, which is why you see that as 0. But we do anticipate we're going to have to phase some of that back in over time. You'll see a bit of that on the next sheet. So you can see that our estimate of our savings as compared to the 2018 budget is about 10.7 million. We have a one-time cost for both of the incentive programs of about 5.4 million. That will be a one-time expense taken in this budget year, and so will be accounted for that way. Pulling out just the impacts of the faculty retirement incentive program, as I said, of the 27 faculty retiring, 24 of them were in the faculty retirement program. The total compensation for them is about $3 million. We do estimate, as I said, having to backfill beginning in FY21 over the next several years after that to begin to phase back in some of those retirements, estimating there about a $1.93 million backfill. And then again, there you see the FRIP expense. On the staff side, we had 77 staff who were eligible for the ISP. Eligibility was determined by benefit-eligible employees whose work was deemed to be going away for the future state. Of those, we extended 45 offers. We asked the 77 people, did you want to participate? That's the number of people said, yes, send me an offer. There were some multi-incumbent positions, so all of that 77 didn't, get the first try to receive an offer. Of the 45 offers extended, 35 people accepted. And there you can see the comp and ben reduction as well as the ISP cost. So between the 35 offers accepted and the number that were extended, we still have 2 outstanding offers for staff that's attributing to people in multi-incumbent positions where we're rolling forward. 3, as well as another individual we had to give an extension. 3 individuals have accepted jobs within Middlebury, so they were able to find another position. 3 did not accept the offer or rescinded. And we actually had 2 employees that we had to account for differently outside of the ISP. So for the number of individuals that we have who did not accept the offer, we feel that that's something that we can manage on a go-forward basis. As I said, the workforce planning effort is not all about the numbers. Going through this effort, it did highlight for us some things that we need to begin to think about strategically. There are some challenges that we were informed about. So in particular, challenges in our local labor market, particularly for entry-level positions. That became clear as we were doing the workforce planning efforts, that we need to be attendant to that, as well as the external competition for talent. The new positions that we're seeking, or as vacancies, new positions become open, we're going to be competing against other higher education institutions for that talent. And so that ties to whether or not we've got the right total compensation strategy. We know that we have some compensation challenges on the faculty side, and we will be doing a comp study on the staff side to just make sure that our salaries are in line and competitive, and our total packages are competitive moving forward. It also revealed that we're probably going to have to think more strategically about shifting the way people work, whether or not we're looking at remote workers or flexible work hours, that was one of the things that it teed up. And also that we have an aging workforce, and we need to be thinking about succession planning as well as preparing ourselves for the next generation of workers. The millennials and iGen are not going to work the same way we work. And so how are we going to get ahead of that curve so that we become a viable employer for those new workforce, as well as having some unmet need. Of the positions that we identified, as you saw on the previous slide, that we are reinvesting in on new talent, there are still some positions we were unable to fill in this FY20 budget. And so we'll need to manage those positions as well as we move forward. But it also gave us some good news, some opportunities for us to explore. One of the things I think it helped us to do is to really focus on what we want the work to be, and to ensure that the work we're doing has the intended impact and leads to Middlebury's success. And in many areas, what came to the forefront is that the student experience really needs to be at the center of all of our planning and what we do. That we can move forward on building the right kind of institutional culture that stands on these principles of intentionality, inclusiveness, stability, mutual respect, transparency, and that we're practicing those kind of values across all of our locations. That we need to value efficiency, that much of what has happened in terms of the workforce planning are redesigned processes that value getting the most work done in the most efficient way. That has some challenges for us in areas where we've been having much more of a high-touch service paradigm. And so we think that that's really an opportunity, though, for us to focus on efficiency so that we can put the high touch in the areas that have the most meaning. We need to prioritize professional development for our employees. The development needs came through, and so we'll be working on that. We need clearer talent management strategies on helping people to all the way from recruit and advertise about Middlebury positions up through development, that we need to be more involved in that. And I think the other part of this is it gives us an opportunity to continue to practice financial discipline. We have workforce plans now. Every VP area has one that is tied to a budget that we can now manage. It talks about the positions that we think are important for our future, and so working with the workforce plans gives us an opportunity to continue to exercise that financial discipline. And so this is just my little closing statement, and it says that life is a matter of choices, and every choice you make makes you. The same is true for our institutional life. Our institutional life is a matter of choices. How we want to work, how we want to be as employees here, what kind of employer we want to be, are all a matter of choice. And we get to make those choices, and every time we make one, it makes Middlebury. And so through the workforce planning process, we've had a chance to define what it is we want, what we want that choice to be, and we have chosen it. We have made some decisions on how we are moving forward. And it will be the continued discipline to stand in those choices that will allow us to make Middlebury be what it is that we've envisioned. And so our hope is that really moving forward, that's what we're working on, standing in the discipline of our choices. So that's the summary for workforce planning, and if there's questions.
So before we open it up to questions, I want to touch on 3 other points. First, the presentations that you just saw are the exact presentations that were presented to the board. In the spirit of Lori's focus and efforts around transparency, this isn't a special staff presentation. You are seeing everything that the board is seeing and everything that we shared with the faculty. Second thing is, in the operating budget for 2020, there is an assumption of a 3% compensation change in addition to the promotions that Karen referenced in the workforce planning and any normal promotion cycles that would take place. And third and final, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are hopeful that coming out of workforce planning in this effort, that starting in this fall, and we've been talking to staff council and the faculty committees about how do we prioritize as we are stable and have new resources, how do we prioritize what's most important to us? So Karen mentioned that we've commissioned a report to process to look at staff salaries. We will get results out of that gives us information, will inform us what issues what we might have and what issues what we need to address. But how does that compare to the issues we have around faculty compensation or new positions that people are looking for? And we're hoping to stimulate those conversations in town hall formats so that we can get to the right choices on how we prioritize those things. So I'm going to open it up to questions. I do want to recognize the finance teams and the HR teams that have, I know everyone in this room participated in these efforts this past year and past 3 years, but the finance team and HR team, we did bring them into the boardroom on Saturday morning to share this information with the board, and I want to thank them. A number of them are here in the room, but there are some people who have worked around the clock on this project, and we're very grateful. So we have 29 minutes for questions, and Leroy has 2.
All right, first one is, what is your suggestion for getting through the low morale felt by many left in the wake of this process?
Yeah, so did everyone hear that question? What is our advice around addressing morale issues? So it is going to take some time. We recognize that and we realize that. I will point to the benefits. And what I mean by that is, if you look at that second slide, we had a $33.5 million problem. If we had kept doing what we were doing, Middlebury College would have been out of business by 2048. That's assuming we could have spent every endowment dollar for something other than it was originally endowed for. So it wasn't a crisis because we have $1 billion in an endowment. It wasn't a crisis because we're strong and we have students who want to come here and we have an incredible faculty and an incredible staff. But we were on a trajectory of not making it another 100 years. Let let alone 20 years. So this was difficult. We did not have to lay off anybody. We did not have to say we didn't start cutting all kinds of programs. We did this by coming together, collectively thinking, making tough decisions. Some were the good decisions, some we'll find out aren't good decisions, but we collectively included the entire organization, or tried to, the best that we could. And I believe we have achieved something in a relatively short period of time. And appreciate and understand that it does have a human toll, but it wasn't done in a rash way where people, where we were making rash decisions, even though if we had continued to remain on the trajectory that we were, this was not going to end well. I know that can fall short to the compassion and the feeling of if I was in a position that was no longer identified as needed in the future state. There's people out looking for new jobs and new opportunities. Some people were ready for retirement, so it was less of a blow. There's a number of positions that we haven't filled that I know might impact you in your daily work because maybe you've had to pick something out. I appreciate that. We believe we did this in a very good manner. We want to make sure we're not put in this situation again, and that's why we will be very focused on not allowing ourselves to get back to where we were.
Okay, what did Karen mean when she said millennials don't work how we work?
So if you look at the research, the millennials, the next generations are probably looking for much more flexibility in how they work. They are not likely to come and stay at a single employer for their lifetime. And that's going to be a different paradigm than what we have been experiencing. And so the question is how do we structure work in ways that are attractive to what they're seeking? This is a generational shift, and we just need to be mindful of that and prepare for it.
Okay, and I have one more. I think it's for you, Karen. When and how will Middlebury and Ms. staff and faculty be informed of which positions have been eliminated as a result of workforce planning?
So I'll take that into a slightly broader question. The question was how will everyone be informed about the positions that have been eliminated? I think the broader question is how will people be informed about the changes that are arising as a result of positions being eliminated? And so each of the vice presidential areas and in their departments are to be working to make sure that they're clear about how they are moving forward and communicating those changes, particularly with key stakeholders. So if it is that we made a change in HR and you used to send your information to Karen, and she's no longer going to be in that position, how is it that we expect you to engage with our office? So we have really looked to ensure that the departments are building out those communications. Having now concluded the financial sustainability portion of workforce planning, HR is working through how we support the departments to now move forward, how to develop people, how to make those communications about the changes, if there are needs for assistance with recruiting. So it's going to be on a go-forward basis, but it should be coming from the departments.
Ashley Lauk, Center for Community Engagement, wondering if in the compensation study that's been commissioned, if there's a particular focus on raising the hourly wage for staff members who are at the bottom of the pay scale making $11 or $12.07 an hour, and if there's not a focus on that in the study, how might the institution choose to focus on that? Hearing a lot of staff members making that unable to meet basic needs living here in Addison County.
Yeah. So the compensation study will be looking at our positions across the institution, and we'll be based in terms of, like David said, we'll get a number of areas that will be identified as us needing to address. That's likely to be one of them, and we'll make the decision in terms of where we want to emphasize in terms of priority.
I will just add that in our conversations with the faculty, and the faculty are concerned about their compensation, but I would say they're also, and maybe even more so, concerned about the same issue you just raised. So when we have the conversation of prioritization, I do believe if the data supports that, we need to raise that from the work that we do. I think it's a good chance of being a priority that the community can get behind.
Oh, Gene, hold on there 1 second. We were told during workforce planning that we should plan on Oracle facilitating new efficiencies. To date, the implementation doesn't indicate this to be true. Are you confident Oracle will deliver what was promised, and if so, by when?
Yeah, so great question. I still maintain, my team still maintains that Oracle will deliver on that promise. We are 5 weeks into an implementation. Bills are being paid. Transactions are being recorded in the general ledger. I know you don't believe it, but all actual numbers are being recorded and all budget numbers are in there. You just haven't seen it yet. And so you want to, and I get it, seeing is believing. We believe we're 14 to 16 days away from being able to deliver on the full view in across campus to the budget to actual. We are in the process of doing the first close of April in Oracle. We've closed all the subledgers, and maybe even today, was it closed? Well, we're this close to closing April. We have gone through and experienced our first upgrade. We will have quarterly upgrades to the Oracle Cloud system. That was done this weekend. So we are in a stabilization period of Oracle, and then our work won't be done. We have to then move and shift to the optimization of Oracle, which is what this question is about. Like, how do we leverage this cloud technology to help facilitate and improve our processes and how we do work? We have seen glimpses of it, especially in the finance area. We expect others will see more as we move to optimization, which will take the next 12 months.
Hi, what is the schedule for the staff compensation survey? Are there target dates that you're working towards?
So we will be running that project through this fiscal year, looking to have the results before the end of the fiscal year, so that we can make some determinations moving into the next budget cycle.
Hi, I'm Arabella Holzapfel from the library. Towards the end, David mentioned something about a 3% compensation change. Is that what we used to call a raise pool?
Yes. So in the top line budget of the salary dollars, we have budgeted and assumed a 3% increase. And in the past, in those difficult years where those lines were separate, that was 2%, and I believe one year was 1.5%. So, and Lori is very committed to seeing that continue to go up.
I'm Dana Barrow from the Office of Advancement. I'm just interested in, you mentioned that thinking of the future of the college and looking in workforce planning, that there were some new skill sets that were seen as important to the future of the institution. And I'm curious to know what those are, just in relation to, what our goals are as we go forward.
They varied by department. We had almost every vice presidential area at least ask for something, so I know we're looking for someone to handle global ops specialists. We are looking for generalists in HR. IT had some new positions that they needed. So they varied by department as to what those needs were. I think if I had to categorize it, there were a combination of both positions where we needed folks to be more generalist, as well as probably more so areas where we needed people with deeper specialty. Okay.
David, two clarifying questions on the 3%. Does that mean the 3% across the board staff increases for staff? And then what about staff that had exceeding expectations on their performance evaluations?
We are still finalizing how the pool will be spent. I expect us to make that announcement next week. But right now, from a budgetary standpoint, what's in there is assumed across the board, when all increases are done outside of promotions, the salary budget of $77 million is going to go up 3%. Come on, there's got to be more questions.
Two completely unrelated questions. First off, do you have numbers on what the endowment has done since 2012 in terms of percentages compared to everything else? Because we're talking about percentages coming out of it. And an HR-related question, with everyone's jobs potentially taking on new responsibilities or different responsibilities, is there going to be a campus-wide approach to staff positions to make sure that they're in the correct band and subdivision, because things have changed a lot for a lot of people?
So I will take the first one, then I'll let Karen answer the second one. So the first question, do we have that data? Absolutely. We monitor the endowment. The endowment today is about $1.2 billion. The endowment back in 2012 was probably about $1 billion. We have had good performance during those years. There's one year it was down considerably. Most other years it's been up, and up well over the 5%. Our issue is when we were taking out 6.7, 6.8, 6.9, 6.5%, we weren't leaving in the endowment that incremental amount that could be returning more in the future. And as you compare us to other institutions that were truly adhering to the 5% withdrawal, you can see their endowments grew at a higher proportional rate. It is harder to raise those endowed dollars than it is to leave them in there, and they will grow and earn. So the board is very focused on this. But I will add to the slide deck before we send it around. I have a slide that is the endowment the last 10 years where you can see the performance.
And on the HR side, the process included having a review of new job descriptions. And so if individuals' portfolio of work was changing, managers were asked to submit new job descriptions, which were actually vetted and, by HR, and recommendations made about salary adjustments. So back on a previous slide where I said 100 people were going to be receiving some pay adjustment or promotion, that's what I was referring to. We have done that as part of the workforce planning process.
Another question, true or false, based on today's email, it doesn't sound like we actually made our financial goals from the ISP process, that there are still needed cuts to compensation to be made.
So from a budgetary standpoint, I'm declaring success. We were able to present to the budget a operating surplus. The one exception to that is the $3 million still assumed in the budget to cover interest expense. I would have liked that to be zero as well. As I explained, we are at 4.8% that is projected to come out of the endowment, plus the $3 million will put us at 5.1. I'm still hopeful that the amount covering interest won't need to be the full $3 million, but I wanted to produce a budget that we could, one, achieve. We have beaten the budget if we achieve FY19, we will have beaten the budget the last 3 years. Compared to the 3 years previous, we were over the budget from a deficit standpoint. So I do not expect us to have to make further cuts. We will need to continue to work as wisely as we have in the last 18 months.
Okay, I've got a couple more here. What percentage of the central admin expenses are allocated to the schools? You'd mentioned a number for Monterey, but not for the schools.
So this is from 2018 actuals. And what we allocate is both cost, plus on the revenue side, we give credit to Monterey and to schools for unrestricted fundraising. So if we receive an anonymous gift for $1 million, do it with it as you want, we allocate a portion of that to schools and to Monterey on the revenue side, so that improves their bottom line. But then we allocate things like finance, advancement, IT, provost office, human resources, communications. In 2018, the amount allocated net of both the good guys and the bad guys to Institute, that was $6.8 million of cost. In 2015, it is now down to $5.3 million in 2018. We will do it for 2019 and then 2019 budget, but I expect it to be in that $4 to $5 million range. At schools, it's about $4 million. The biggest expense that we allocate both to the Institute, so depreciation, $21 million, $22 million, that is all on the college's central admin budget. We actually literally go and say, what are the buildings in Monterey, and move all that depreciation to the Monterey financials. In the case of schools, we charge the schools the depreciation related to 2.5 months. 2.5 months? 2.5 or 3? 2. 2 months. We take 2 months of the depreciation and say that's on schools, because basically all our buildings are supporting schools roughly for 2 months out of the year. So that's how it's done. It's an art, not a science.
Will there be any opportunity for staff for training to fill some of the future positions that were mentioned?
I think that's one of the things we're looking at, to be able to get our arms clearly around the development needs and figuring out how we can support it both centrally, as well as if it's not going to be centrally supported, how we might make the connections for people to get that training. But professional development is one of the highlighted opportunities for us.
Okay. I have more, unless someone here has one. You got one? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carrie McFarlane in the library. Karen, I think this question is for you. In answer to the question earlier on about how we could expect to learn about shifts and drops in FTE, you suggested that we would learn within our areas, and that makes sense. What's the plan for us to learn about shifts and transitions and drops in FTE in offices outside of our areas?
And so part of that would be, if you're a key stakeholder, you should be hearing it from that department. So if you're somebody that engages heavily with that, my expectation is that the department would be notifying its key stakeholders. We're also looking at developing an institutional workforce plan that somehow synthesizing all of these individual plans into one kind of statement is what we're looking for, so that would help with some of that communication. But it really is incumbent upon the department that's doing the work to be able to explain the changes to those who rely on that work.
Hi, Doug Perkins in the museum. What we have in our department based on, for workforce planning, is based on rumor, more or less. So we know something about what our future state supposedly is going to be, but we'd love to know what a timeline would be for when we'll hear whether there are any positions that were approved for FY20 or beyond.
Certainly. So part of the closing out of the financial sustainability portion of workforce planning is to get all of those numbers finalized. And I know David has been working with Kathy Vincent in HR to sign off on those sheets. The actual financial plan, so each vice president is going to get a financial plan that says, these are the number of ISP takers and the dollar amounts that represents. These are the vacancies that you had going away. These are the positions that are no longer going to be needed, but you're repositioning that individual into another position. Do we have a date on when those will be final?
Oh, we're close.
We're close. So when we get that, that is the playbook for FY20. It tells you which positions have been approved, which promotions have been approved, as well as the timing for moving forward with those positions. So hopefully within a week or so, within a week, the vice presidents will have that, and then you should hear that percolating through the departments.
Karen, a kind of a follow-up question that came in earlier is, what if we don't get that clarity from our vice president? Is there an
vice president.
Yes, go to your vice presidents. We have been reiterating that. Really is that vice presidents have to help drive this information. We certainly cannot do it centrally from HR. They're on our workforce plans, right? So really, we are working with the vice presidents to make sure that this information gets distributed.
Schedule a meeting with your supervisor to go visit your vice president. And if it's in my area, just call Jean, you get on the calendar. I want to get back to the question on the endowment. Here's a snapshot. This is a slide that I've shown in the past. So the blue line is the net additions to the endowment in those years. That could be performance, so the return. So if it's above, if it's the blue going above, that is positive. So you can see, for example, in 2016, that's where it was negative. The orange line is the withdrawals. That is what we take out for the 5% for the additional amounts. And then the grayish bar is the net change to the endowment. So in 2010, for example, the change in endowment from year to year was an improvement of $78 million. You can see in 2016 was the only year that had a negative impact, or sorry, 2012 and 2016 are the 2 years where the endowment actually decreased because combination of the amount we took out and the actual performance.
Hi, Ginny from IT. I want to go back to the question of low morale here. And all the discussion that we've been having so far is mostly based on finances and financial implications of various and sundry tasks. I'm wondering what discussions have been made that are non-financial upon first glance, recognizing that I'm going to contradict myself by saying most of them are financially based. But I'm wondering what additional items have been discussed to raise morale here for staff?
Certainly. I think the key to that is us all being clear about how we are moving forward. So not only putting the financial components to how we're moving forward, but the substance, the content of that in terms of from each area what it is that we've decided we want to achieve, and engaging people in that forward-thinking conversation as well. Doing it in ways that actually help to increase our engagement with employees. So working, including people in conversation as opposed to kind of directing conversation. But I think it really is us beginning to just start having the how are we going to move forward conversation, and how are each of us viewed as an important component of that future. So the next phases, as we talked about in terms of HR, working with the department and project teams on how to move forward, that's really what the emphasis is like, can we shift it from the financial conversation into the how do we position ourselves to thrive conversation.
And I would just add, to thrive, I think the key component is around empowerment. The organizational structure here, the hierarchy of all decisions are made at Old Chapel. People have heard me say that we make very few decisions in Old Chapel, because if you put 17 vice presidents and a president in one room, I will guarantee you there won't be consensus. So how your operations and departments thrive and effectively operate, the answers lie within your organization. We, as Karen mentioned, we need to be clear on where we're going, but we need to do a better job of truly empowering our operational folks in the field to make Middlebury great.
I have one practical suggestion to that, and we invested over the last couple of years, starting with our students and then some faculty and staff, in restorative practices. And I feel like that's been a resource that's been underutilized that could really help with getting the morale issues out on the table and helping people process that. So I'd like to see more investment in that area.
Looking at the time, this might be the last question. So is it true that the compensation for exceeds expectations will now be a one-time bonus rather than a permanent increase? Won't that affect our staff negatively in the long run? And how will that affect our comparison with other employers?
So as David mentioned, we are working through the final structure for the increases for next year. There is discussion about doing an across the board and a one-time bonus. The issue is that everybody was impacted by the 2% and the 1.7% increases that we have all experienced over the last several years. And so the idea of being able to bring everybody up to compensate for the fact that we've all been bearing that expense for a couple of years would underlie the decision to move to something that's more across the board. But we still want to be able to recognize individuals who have exceeded. And so we're still working on that, and we'll have information about that in the next week.
You want another one? Okay.
Sure.
All right, we are, okay. Does the future state include review of operational processes to identify efficiencies, fraud, waste, and abuse? And if so, what does that look like?
The answer to that is yes. Some departments were able to do that as part of their workforce planning. I have a sense that there is need for more support for that. And that will be one of the things we'll take into account on how we can present some workshops for people to figure out how to look at their business processes and to learn how to operate more efficiently.
You want another one? Sure. Are the ISP and FRIP costs included in the draw on the endowment figures?
Great question. So the plan would be to all those payments that are one-time payments, which will be paid, the majority of it will be paid in July of 2019. We will accrue that to fiscal year 2019. It will be a non-operating expense because it's one time, and the funding of it will come from the endowment. Then we're off that heroin.
Okay, as a millennial working in a permanent position at Middlebury, I want to see more bottom-up communication, initiatives, and participatory decision-making across the entire enterprise. There's a lot of dormant creativity, ideas, and potential that is not tapped or developed among the staff. Economic equity is also important. Millennials are saddled with a lot more education debt than past generations. Future pay bands need to take that into account. Does the SLG recognize management as a serious practice and field of research similar to medicine, law, and accounting, a field that they need to continually educate in? And would they consider reading and learning more about positive organizational development, a subfield of management?
The short answer is yes to all of that. One of the areas of focus, so to the comment, will the next generation work differently? We have some evidence that they are looking for some different things in their employment. And to that managerial question, we have convened a group that's called Leadership Alliance. It is individuals who manage programs, people, or budgets in that exact vein to begin to focus on enhancing our managerial capacity to be able to lead toward a more positive organization and outcome.
And another millennial question. Studies show that millennials are weighted down by student debt and stagnant wages. They can only contribute the bare minimum to their retirement plans and struggle to find affordable homes within a commuting distance of their jobs. making at least 40% less than baby boomers. This generation is the largest in the U.S. labor force and will comprise more than 75% of the workforce by 2025. Karen acknowledged the fact that this generation is the future of Middlebury and that millennials job hop, since they job hop due to lack of promotions, instability, and being notoriously underpaid. How does Middlebury plan to start supporting this group when workforce planning has removed so many possibilities for upward career mobility and promotions?
I'm not so sure I accept the last premise that workforce planning has removed opportunities. We've both increased the number of new positions as well as had promotions that for individuals that eventually, one day all of us will hopefully decide to retire, and those would be available. So I don't accept the last premise. But in terms of that strategic issue, I can tell you that the HR team is actually going into retreat on Thursday, and that's one of the topics we're going to raise. How do we begin to get our arms around the question of remaining an employer of choice for those next generations? And it may be that we'll be able to convene something to start getting that information from our own millennial staff to help inform. We need those strategies. It is coming. All of us that are in here that are coming of a certain age are going to make a decision to leave at some point, and we need to be prepared for that next workforce. So for those who have identified as millennials on this, please listen out. We'll be looking to get your input and for us to kind of figure out what our strategies need to be long term.
I do have one more. This is about the VPs and disseminating information about the workforce planning. So if VPs are responsible for disseminating the information, what guidance is given to the VPs in terms of how and when to communicate the information in consistent ways? This hasn't been a stellar form of communication in the past, so what are we doing differently this time?
So this is a topic of conversation at our senior leadership meetings. I keep hearing that. We may not have been as effective in that. I will take it on personally to work with the vice presidents to make sure that these communications are happening. By now, everyone should have heard at least the preliminary design for the future state, pending whatever the financial determinations were going to be. Within a week or so, we're going to have the financial determinations so that everyone will have the complete picture. And we will put a structure in place and accountability measures to ensure that everybody's getting the message.
I would just add to the point of how do we try to keep it consistent. Meetings like this, sharing the exact information we've shared with the board, exact information that we've shared with the faculty, followed up by you received 2 communications this morning. One was from Lori on this topic. Second was from Jeff Case and myself and Karen. So everyone at the at the highest level of information communication, we're disseminating it. Where we want to make sure that it doesn't break down is then down into the actual department of the detail that's in those sheets. But we're hoping that those steps will help improve that.
Yeah, hey, I'm Tim. On behalf of Staff Council, thanks for all of your work. This has been great. I think all of staff have heard, for the last 9 or 10 months that we're just going to go through this again in 10 more years. And we have also heard a lot of folks concerned as a particular with the 100 folks lost to attrition, that a lot of the folks that have left have just been in the lower bands. So Staff Council in the last 9 or 10 months has been asking for a snapshot both of the bands and positions where we were before the workforce plan process, and then a list of bands and positions where we are at now and what was eliminated. And it sounds to me at this point that we won't get that list, and we'll have to query each VP individually, and I just want to make sure that that is the case.
No, that's not the case. As I recall, I think we did share the baseline. We did take that baseline snapshot of the number of positions that were in each band and level prior to workforce planning. We can now take a snapshot of what it looks like post workforce planning. Need to check with HR folks whether that needs to wait until the increases are actually in, which for many people will not be until July 1. But we can also look at just at the positions that were eliminated as well as the new positions that are added. We can get that information. I can recirculate the baseline information that we shared with Staff Council back in September, I think it was, before September, October, before this all got started in earnest. And we will follow up with that additional information so that you can see where the changes are. And my belief that it was not done on the backs of the lowest paid staff.
To the first part of your comment around how do we prevent this from happening 10 years from now? We've been on a 10-year cycle. So I've been working with the Faculty Resources Committee, with the Board of Trustees Resource Committee. I have floated draft language around. My intention is to bring forward a board resolution to the fall meeting that would set guidelines and parameters on the finance office of Middlebury College of certain things to adhere to through the budget process and the actual reporting. They would include, you have to produce a budget in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, fully funding depreciation, fully funding interest expense, and only withdrawing 5% from the endowment, and producing an operating surplus. If the finance department brought forward a budget to the board that didn't achieve that, that would trigger some mechanism for some public process to say, what are we going to do differently so that we don't have this gradual deficit building, start taking a little more out of the kitty, regardless of who's here, right? And this is really important to the faculty. They've asked, how do we prevent this? I will say, as difficult as workforce planning was, as long as I'm here, I'm just telling you, do not believe this model is sustainable if we think every problem can only be solved by adding more people. It is critical that we identify the things that we have to stop doing but still deliver an incredible Middlebury education. And that is our dilemma going forward. If you take our tuition rate today and assume a 4% increase, we'll cross the 100,000 mark in 2029. If you even lower it to 3%, we're going to cross the 100,000 mark in 2032. That's not that far away. And so we have to always be continuing to imagine, and higher ed is under attack because of this, and we're under siege because of this. So the continuing efficiency and improvement and opportunities in front of us, we do some really silly things here. This empowerment comment that I made before is we need to hear from you of the silly things we need to stop doing that will not impact what goes on in our classrooms. We saw some of that during the process of workforce planning and saw some successes. Understand it's difficult work. There will always be someone who wants to keep doing the silly thing. I get that, but you got to bring the groups together to talk through and say, does this make sense? And that relates to the question about evaluating things that are wasteful. But this model is not sustainable long term if we go back to adding another 100 to 150 people to fix all of our problems. Okay, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your efforts around this. This is good news. I know it's been tough the last 3 years. This budget, the board was very appreciative and excited about what was brought forward. It is the result of the people in this room, and thank you This is a moment to celebrate and say, let's move forward to better days.